We've already formed a quorum. It is also time to start the meeting. So please invite the team from the administration to join us. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Since we have had so many meetings, I'm not going to introduce you one by one. Item 1 on the agenda, cross scrutiny. We should start with clause 71. That's in relation to section 64K. So please turn to paper CB bracket 1 1833/13 to 14 bracket 01. Page 182, which is the Chinese version of the marked up copy. The administration has also prepared an index for the cross scrutiny, and there's a CB bracket 1 369/14 to 15 bracket 03, which has set out all the policies as well as the relevant papers so as to facilitate members' scrutiny. So we will carry out the cross scrutiny directly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At your last meeting, we explained section 64J. Now we are on 64K. Last time, we want to make sure that the directors would not be the director or employee of other licensed insurance agency. Now here in 64K, we are having a similar restriction in relation to licensed insurance broker companies. So the directors or employees of a broker company, if they deal with regulated activities, then they must not be the proprietor or a partner of a licensed insurance agency, and should not be a director or employee of an agency, and should not deal with the relevant regulated activities. You find the penalty in subsection 3, which is a fine at level 6 and imprisonment for 6 months. No questions, we move on. Yes, Mr. Chen. I think I left early because I had to attend other business at your last meeting. For 64J, about the agents, I think the Office of the Insurance Commission, the OCI, has already said that they would pay attention to this point, because sometimes it is not easy to understand the operation. I expect some more amendments from the administration. Ms. Choi. Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman. For this bill, as I have explained, we just want to strike a balance. We don't want the same person to represent a number of companies at the same time. Being a director is fine. If he is a shareholder, it's also fine. But then, if he is to deal with any matter that relates to a regulated activity, then there would be a conflict of interest. And that's the main point that we would like to impose a restriction. So if he's simply a director or a shareholder, and if it doesn't take part in the regulated activities, then it will be fine. I think we addressed this point last time. Chair, you did ask as to why we simply disallowed dealing in both companies, and that seemed to have solved the problem. But then in the industry, there was this idea that it was purely a matter of investment, and he acted as a shareholder, and he should have been allowed to take part in another company. So we think we should strike a balance, and it should be allowed. But then he would not be allowed to take part in any matter that relates to a regulated activity. So when it comes to the operation of the company, since the operation has to do with the regulated activity like the sale and the promotional tactics, that would not be allowed. But then if you're involved in the administrative matters like recruitment or the premises, then if it is not related to the regulated activity, then it will be acceptable. Mr. Chen, well, the industry is worried about the scope being cast too wide in relation to any matter that relates. Now, the Commissioner has explained as to what will be covered. Do you have anything in writing to allay the fears of the industry? Mr. Chairman, when we talked to the industry, I did express the view that in the future, the IIA in future will provide certain codes. So in relation to 64J and K, I think details can be given as to define what is allowed and what is not allowed. So the more common scenarios can be covered in what's allowed and what's not. In this case, things will be clearer. If I may also remind Mr. Chen, any matter that relates to a regulated activity of the agency, so it is being qualified. If you just look at the 3 words with any matter, then it seems that it is a wide scope. But then if you also look at the restriction, then it is not as wide. Why don't you just say who deals with any regulated activity? Then it's acceptable. But then if you say any matter, then it seems that it is too wide. I'm afraid the industry is bordered by such a drafting. Point taken. DFJ, please explain why during your drafting you have added any matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We understand the policy intention that it is not in relation to the director carrying out regulated activities. So it is the policy intention deals with any matter that relates to a regulated activity of the agency, and that's why we've drafted so.
All right, if it's related to any regulated activity, so why any matter that relates to a regulated activity of the agency? So why can't you change the wording? Because you're actually widening it, so what will be covered if it's worded like that? Well, I note the concern of Mr. Chen. Maybe after the meeting, we can talk to our policy unit to see how the drafting can be modified in order to align better the policy intent and the wording. Yes, Commissioner, just a moment. Yes, Chairman, actually what I'd like to say is that well, under the existing insurance ordinance, section 65, the same restriction applies, and there it says that if a person, if he's at the same time a director or an employee of a licensed insurance agency, that's okay, so long as he is not going to give any advice to a policy holder, because under the new ordinance, well, whenever there is a regulated activity, a license will be required. That's why, on the basis of the original provision, we try to make a corresponding change. And as Mr. Chen pointed out, the industry is of the view that the scope would be somewhat broader than the previous provision. But then we have heard different voices from the industry, because some insurance companies are of the view that the way it is worded here, they welcome this new provision, but then there are some concerns expressed by other sectors of the industry. So through the Federation, we have already had some discussion with the industry. And in fact, the Federation has also proposed some wording for the further amendments, and we're going to have further meetings with the industry to see if our policy might be affected if we accept their wording. Because our policy is very simple. Well, for insurance brokers and insurance agencies, they're representing two different sectors. For the insurance brokers, they're representing the clients, but then for the insurance agents, they're representing the insurance companies. That's why we'd like to make sure that nobody would be wearing two hats, causing any conflict of interest. That's why we do have some room for discussion with the industry. Yes, Commissioner? Yes, I'd like to supplement. As the Deputy Secretary just said, under this existing Section 65, there are already similar restrictions. But then the current provision is that if you give any advice to your client, then that would be restricted. But then we are now using regulated activity, and that would be asking another party to enter into a contract or to adduce another party to enter into a contract. We have seen some acts committed by the agency which might have circumvented the existing provision, and they would say that I'm not directly giving an advice to my client, but then I would be instructing one of my employees or subordinates to give the advice, or I'll be bringing him together with me to meet with that client, so that on the face of it, it would have been him doing the marketing. That's why we believe that this way of circumventing the provision of the law, that would constitute a loophole. That's why we think that there is a need for us to word it in such a way that under the new ordinance, we will be making it very clear that he must not be involved in any regulated activity of a licensed insurance agency or broker agency. Because even if you are instructing another party to do it, or if you are bringing other party to do it, this will still be breaking the law. So we would like to bring that up more clearly. Mr. Chen, I think my emphasis is also on this. That is, we will have to continue to liaise with the Federation in order to find out what's the best way to go about it, whether or not it's the intermediaries or whatever. So they are not trying to break the law. They are just trying to find out or make sure that what they've been doing should be okay. And they have no intention of circumventing the law whatsoever. Yes, Mr. Sin, I understand that there have been some voices from the industry expressing concern about this. But then I think it's just common sense. If I'm a director, well, as a shareholder, it's okay. So let's say if I'm in the management of a company, and if I buy shares of another company, I can still be called a shareholder. It's okay. But then being a director, but then if you're not involved in the decision making of that corporation, that's not acceptable. Well, in the policy-making process of that company, I think many of the decisions would have to do with the regulated activity that might not have to do directly with any particular policy. But then being involved in the decision-making process of a company would be very common for any director, and therefore, if you have to refrain from the discussion, or else even if you just read the minutes, or if you just take part in a discussion or sit in the discussion, that's still not desirable. Looking at it from another perspective, all right, if you have become a director of a particular company, well, I think to put it more bluntly, it's highly likely that you would be involved in the decision-making process. So how do you strike a balance? I think it's very difficult. That's why, as I asked last time, in fact, for one-man company, I think would it be more appropriate, Or else, if you're being sued, well, last time you also gave me a response. In fact, we have already passed that provision, but I'm bringing that up again. So you can always take a look at the minutes. So does that mean that, all right, he has managed to escape that, and then he could be blacked out in a particular part of the minutes? So, Chairman, I'm sure you know very well that it's really quite unthinkable. Well, as you said, as the DS said, we are still liaising with the Federation, and within the insurance company sector, they have also got different views. For example, there are agencies and also insurance agencies and broker agencies and so on. But then if you set up other companies and if you take part in other regulated activities, that's also not good. That's why amongst the company within the sector, there are also divergent views. But then for intermediaries, if they've invested in other companies and therefore they hope that there can be very clear delineation as to what is allowed and what is not allowed. But then we have also seen the gray areas, and that's why some people might be able to circumvent the restrictions. That's why we have come up with this new provision. I think we are still liaising with the Federation, and we are still looking at whether or not there are other ways of expressing the same intent more clearly. So we are also aware of the concern of Mr. Sin, and we will continue to liaise with the Federation to see if the wording can be further improved, to make it clearer or to make it more clear-cut. So we will be looking into that again. But then I hope that you would understand that that's the original intention and why we have worded it in such a manner. And also in other areas, we have also taken a look at other areas. Basically, in the law, for example, in the UK and in Singapore, they have also not made it very clear. So all they are trying to say is that there should be no conflict of interest whatsoever. And then in the code of practice and so on, they've also put it that way. But then what would constitute a conflict of interest? In fact, it would be for the regulator to look into it. For example, if you're also a director of another company, then they would find out if there is a conflict of interest, and then you would be banned from taking up the directorship of that company. So in other areas, well, they would make it very abstract in the law, but then it would be for the regulator or the enforcement agency to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But then under the current situation, we've already made it clear that certain activities are not allowed, because the industry would also like us to make it clear so that they will be able to follow. And that's why the way we have worded it is somewhat different from other places. So we will try to take a look into it and see what we should be doing. But then according to my understanding, well, for directors, in fact, they might be involved in many areas, including the financial management and also the administrative management of the company. That's why, under the existing legislation, I think it would only cover the principal business of the company. But then what Mr. Sin referred to was a more comprehensive solution. All right, you can be a shareholder, but then you cannot be a director. But then my understanding of your original intention of coming up with this provision, that's because of the historical background to this. And if you just adopt an across-the-board approach in dealing with the situation, it might cause some conflict with what is happening on the ground. So I hope that with the establishment of the IIA, it can come up with more clear guidelines so as to resolve the existing conflict. And you should try to come up with a compromise approach so that on the one hand you can meet the legislative intent, and on the other you would not be causing too much problem for the sector. So you will have to coordinate fully with the Federation in order to foster a consensus so that the whole system can work more effectively. And in the process of your discussion, you should also exchange views on how the code of practice should be drafted so that there can be a better consensus. Yes, Mr. Chen, any further questions? Thank you, Chairman. What you said was right, because it's easy to adopt an across-the-board approach. But then what about other people who have been doing this? And the Commission has been looking into certain practices, and you should just target those scenarios. You should not be adopting an across-the-board approach. You should approach the sector so that they will give you more examples and tell you what should be done. I think this is still an outstanding problem. It's not resolved yet. So I hope that they can further liaise with the sector to find a better solution. All right, please do update us on the latest progress of your discussion with the sector to see if you can reach a consensus. Next, 64JK, we have dealt with it already. Now it's 64L. Under 64L1, it says that a person who is a licensed technical representative can only represent one licensed insurance agency, and then 64L2 and 64M provide that unless the licensed insurance agency has been licensed to be engaged in the regulated activities in line with the business, or else the person will not be allowed to be involved in any regulated activity in that line of business. In other words, for a licensed technical agency or a licensed insurance agency's representative, he can only carry on regulated activities in line with business unless is otherwise provided. Just a minute, Mr. Sin. Well, I'm not quite familiar with the operation of the industry. Can you speak to the microphone, please? Yes, of course. Concerning the mode of operation of the sector, I don't really understand it, but then I'd just like to ask this. All right, it's possible that for an insurance agency, it might be setting up different agencies to sell different products. For example, one would be selling domestic insurance, others would be selling different insurance policies. So still it's an insurance agency. So does that mean that you would be looking at the parent company, or would you be looking at the subsidiaries? Because well, for a subsidiary company, it will still constitute a company independently under the law. So how would you be dealing with the parent company and also the subsidiaries? All right, when we look at the line of business in the law, there are two major types. One would be long-term business, in other words, life insurance, and also retirement protection insurance. But then for other general insurance business, we can always have other forms, including travel insurance. So how would it operate? Well, for a particular insurance agency, it would have got an insurance broker or intermediary license. So for the employees of that company, well, for the business representatives, they are only allowed to sell travel insurance because that agency is only authorized to sell travel insurance, and therefore its representatives cannot go beyond the scope of business of that particular company. But then, as Mr. Sin pointed out, well, for example, if there is a comprehensive insurance company, it has a general business and also long-term business, and then for its business representatives, well, so long as the agency is authorized to do a particular type of business, then they would be allowed to engage in those forms of business. And therefore, they would be allowed to go as far as the company is allowed to do so. All right, if that company is now going to get registered, so the insurance agent will be taking exam on several types. For example, general business and also long-term business and also travel business. And therefore, if a particular insurance company is allowed to engage in a particular type of business, then the employee will be allowed to be involved in the same type of business. But then for a particular company, if it can sell different products, then of course the representatives can sell different products on behalf of a company.
Maybe there's a parent company having a subsidiary selling travel insurance, another one for comprehensive, and then a third one for life. So instead of having one single company selling all four products, Say, for example, we have got an employee selling motor insurance, but then he has already taken exams on like travel insurance as well. Say a parent company having 3 or 2 subsidiaries. Can this person also sell other products, Mr. Chairman? Maybe I spoke too fast. Now, we have got a parent company, and then we have got an intermediary. They either is an agent or a broker. So it all depends on the line of business of either the broker or the agent. Say we have an insurance company entrusting another company to sell long-term business or general business. As long as the representative can only sell a line of business which is the same as that company. The way I understand Mr. Sin's question is as follows, and let me deal with it in a more specific manner. Say, for example, we have got an insurance company, a comprehensive one, with 4 subsidiaries selling different products. Company A is for fire risk, etc. B for motor insurance. Company C for others like travel insurance. And then Company D dealing in life insurance. So companies A, B, C, and D come under Company A. I am employed by Company A. Sorry, they are under a parent company, and then I'm employed by Company A of the parent company, and I'm responsible for fire risk. But it so happens that my client would like to take out motor insurance, but the motor insurance is a product of Company B. So I wonder if I can also offer this product. That is, Company A selling a product of Company B, or say, for example, my client would like to get a life insurance, which is the business of Company D. So can I sell a life product? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we talk about the licensing regime, we are talking about the intermediaries, that is the companies as well as the individuals. Just now you talked about the various lines of business, but then that's not to be covered by 64L. We are talking about the intermediary businesses. So employees can only sell the products of the agents or the brokers. So it's not the companies, that of the agents or the brokers. Are you clear? A little bit. Say, for example, if I may cite this example. Now, banks are agents. They are agents. They sell products for the same group or otherwise. So when a bank employs a person to sell this insurance product, then this person can only sell a product which corresponds with the line of business of this bank. Commissioner. Well, the licenses of an intermediary, the license is either that for life insurance or investment linked, and then for 64L and 64M. Now, if a company entrusts the business to an agency to sell, for example, general insurance, then this representative can only represent this company to sell this product only, even if the representative has been qualified for other products, he can't sell other products. Now we're talking about the licensed company. We don't make a difference. We are not sort of judging on the basis of whether it is a parent company or a subsidiary company. Say, for example, a parent company has got 4 subsidiaries, and I'm an agent. Can I be employed at the same time by 2 or 3 subsidiaries of the same parent company? Now you go back to an earlier subsection. For the scenario outlined by Mr. Sin, then that's covered by 64L1. There is a person who is a licensed technical representative agent of a licensed insurance agency must not also be a licensed technical representative agent of another one. Even if we are talking about the same holding company, it can't be allowed. No, it's quite clear. Let's continue. For 64N, the new 64N, this is to replace Section 65(13) to 14. It says that an authorized insurer must not enter into a contract of insurance through another person in Hong Kong unless A, that person is a licensed insurance intermediary, or B, that person's duties only involve clerical or administrative duties. And an authorized insurer who contravenes this section, that person, the policyholder can have the option of either making it enforceable against the insurer or making it void. That is the contract. And then subsection 4, a policyholder who under subsection 3 opts to void a contract of insurance before expiry of the contract is entitled to recover any consideration paid. Subsection 5, an authorized insurer which contravenes the earlier subsections is liable on conviction on indictment to a fine of $1 million, imprisonment 2 years, or on summary conviction to a fine at level 6 or imprisonment for 6 months. Mr. Sin, it is only when a person contravenes 3B then you can get back the residual value, right? Are we talking about the residual value only? Mr. Chairman, consideration paid according to the contract, that is the premium. According to 3B, it means that the contract is void. When the contract is void, the consideration collected, would it be the entire amount of the premium or the balance? No, it says clearly to recover any consideration paid. In other words, the full premium. In other words, all the premium can be recovered. Because when it is void, then it is void from day one. I have a question. Like it is a motor insurance. And I have to get the coverage on day one of renewal my vehicle registration. Somehow I've got an agent or broker who's not right and he contravenes the law, but then my car has been on the road for 6 months. So does it mean that my car has been deprived of the insurance for 6 months? No, Mr. Chairman. The policyholder can choose to void the contract. He could have chosen A. Despite the breach, he can still enforce it against the insurer. So the insurer has to enforce it. But can I also void the contract? No. If you want to ask the insurer to continue with it, then it's fine. Or you can choose B. For B, it means it is void from day one. I think in your code in the future, you need to make sure that the policyholders have been reminded. Because if they choose 3B, it means that the vehicle owner will be breaching another piece of legislation, that is motor vehicle registration. So please make sure you note this point. Any other questions? No? Then page 185, Division 3, Licensing, 64O. This is about the register of licensed insurance intermediaries. The authority must keep a register of licensed insurance intermediaries for the public's inspection, and then the latest information should be supplied. Under 64O, the register needs to contain certain information, and it is set out here, like name or names of the licensed insurance intermediary, business address and conditions, as well as the date of appointment. The name or names of each licensed insurance intermediary and the name of each of the authorized insurers at each rank, or just the one supervising him. If it is applicable, then every intermediary. There may be more than one responsible officer. In other words, this person is responsible for the operation and compliance of each intermediary. So that's about the person in charge or person responsible for the intermediary, rather than each and every rank. So at law, we need a person to be responsible, and that's the person. Mr. Chairman, may I supplement? We're going to provide for a definition of who's meant by the responsible person. Sorry, speakers off mic. In J and K, we talk about the lines of business that they may carry on, and K, a record of every disciplinary action taken by specified authority against any licensed insurance intermediary or responsible officer in the last 5 years. Subsection 2, Subsection 3, a person may, free of charge, inspect the register, and then at a prescribed fee level, get a copy of the information. Subsection 4. If a person would like to have access to the register or inspect the register, this right is only exercisable for enabling a person to ascertain whether the person is dealing with a licensed insurance intermediary or responsible officer in matters of or connected with any regulated activity, or to ascertain the particulars of the licensing of a person as a licensed insurance intermediary or the approval and the approval details.
And if there are no questions, then we are on page 189. I have a question. First, on the registration. Well, apparently the particulars are very detailed. Have you consulted those who will be affected? So do they have any comments on the proposed registration process? So have you consulted the Privacy Commission? Yes, we have. And also, for the inspection of the register, are there any ways available for people to inspect the register? Do you have to go to the IIA before you can have access to the hard copy of the register? Or can you check it online? Or can you make a phone can you make an inquiry by phone? Well, it says that you will be able to access the register online, but then can they download the details? Well, if you try to check it online, then every page can be printed out, and we have a provision saying that if you want to have a hard copy of the register, then so long as you're willing to pay a fee, then the IIA will have to provide a copy of that. Please move on. Yes, Mr. Sin, Chairman, I welcome this provision. But then what I'd like to ask is that, all right, for the information provided online, that should cover everything under 64.0, is that right? Is that correct? Yes. So, to be more specific, for example, under K, during the past 5 years, with regard to the information related to the intermediary, other than those other than the information that has been excluded. Yes, that's correct, Chairman. Next, page 189 is 64P and 64R and 64T. Basically, for the licensee, if the details of his appointment has changed, or if he has suspended his business, then the licensee has the duty to report to the IIA, and 64P is about the duty to notify the authority of change in particulars. So for the person responsible, if there are any changes to the particulars, then he has a duty to notify the authority. And the required details are set out in subsection 2. Is about the name, the business or residential address, the telephone and fax numbers, electronic mail address, and also any other particulars that are prescribed by rules made under section 127. So, if there are any changes to the above mentioned particulars, then the licensed insurance intermediary must notify the authority in writing of any change of particulars within 14 days after the date on which the change takes place. And under subsection 6, it says that if there is any breach, then it can be subjected to a fine at level 5. Ms. Sito, I'd like to go back a little, Chairman. On an earlier provision 64.0, subsection K, it says that if it's a suspension in the registration, then the register will also feature the period of suspension. All right. Yes, your license has been suspended for a brief period of time, but then in the course of that, if there are appeals or for whatever reason, before the expiry of the suspension, will that continue to feature in the record? What if it's a permanent deregistration? Would the name be crossed out altogether, or will you have a note saying that since the company has committed a very serious violation, that's why it has been the license has been revoked? Well, we will have to look at subsection 1. So we are actually looking at the past 5 years, and also the intermediary, the record of every disciplinary action that has been taken against it. So if it's a termination or revocation of the license, since it's a record of the disciplinary action taken against it. And then for suspension, so in English we call that suspension, and it's also one form of the disciplinary action. That's why in the course of the suspension period, the intermediary cannot engage in any regulated activity. That's why we will also have to make it clear in the register as to the period during which it is not allowed to engage in such activities. So it's a disciplinary action. And also during the appeal period, because we have to complete all the procedures before the disciplinary action can take place. So there is no question of the appeal not being dealt with, and then the suspension will immediately take place, and therefore a record being entered into the register. So whether it's a suspension or a revocation, well, a record for 5 years will be kept online, and then it will be updated, and then after 5 years it will be deleted. So whether or not the intermediary stays in the industry, the record will be deleted, right? Correct. Well, under the banking ordinance, they also refer to a particular period. So why 5 years? We have also made reference to the three self-regulation systems. Well, for agents' self-regulation system, we do have a similar provision. That's why, after making reference to those legislation, those pieces of legislation, we have put in place this one. Yes, you have made reference to similar regulatory systems, but then for banks and so on, they would often use 7 years. So for transaction details and so on, they will be required to keep it for 7 years. So have you made that comparison? Why 5 years? Well, it's not appropriate for us to compare ourselves with banks, because for banks, they are authorized institutions, and then for insurance companies, they are not exactly the same. But then here we are referring to the intermediaries, the persons involved, because individuals can also be licensed intermediaries. They can also be companies. And such intermediaries can also be banks, and therefore it's hard to come up with a hard and fast rule as to how long the record can be kept. Well, I remember making reference to those. So when you try to regulate companies, for how long would they be required to keep the records? Under the company's ordinance, it's for 7 years. So would that result in an inconsistency with the regulation under the company's ordinance? But Chairman, here we are referring to the records of a company, but then here we are referring to the record of disciplinary actions, and I think the nature is very different. Well, to require it to be kept for 3, 5, 7 years, there is no hard and fast rule, because for the longer the record is kept, then the impact on the party concerned would be significant, because it would affect their reputation. That's why we have made reference to the mechanism of self-regulation, and we've come up with this 5-year rule. We hope that it will be acceptable to the industry as well as to the public. We believe that 5 years is an appropriate period. Well, Mr. Sin, I think the industry has also approached me, because it has to do with a particular individual's prospect or career. Because if the record is kept for too long, then it would affect that individual's ability in engaging in such activities. That's why, well, to require the particulars of a company to be kept for 7 years, I think it's very different from an individual whose records will be kept for 5 years. And according to my understanding, the practitioners are very concerned. At the same time, we also have to bear in mind the right to know by the consumers. That's why we try to strike a balance between the two, and therefore between 5 and 7 years, I hope the administration can make the right decision. Some even suggested that 5 years would be too long, and they suggested 3 in return. So it's for the administration to decide. I don't think there is a particular meaning to the duration of the period. So what is important is to strike the right balance. Well, everything is relative. Chairman, I agree with what you said just now. But then if you try to make a comparison, for example, if we are trying to compare them with other professions, for the other regulated professions, for example, for lawyers or accountants or other professionals. So what is the rule right now? If they have committed any wrongdoing, will there be any records, and for how long will such records be kept? I think the most appropriate comparison would be licensed intermediaries under the SFO. So they are also involved in regulated activities, for example, for SFC licensees. So how would that be regulated? For how long will the record be kept? So, Chairman, I also agree that for the licensees under the MPF system, they would also be regulated by that, because they would also be working for the insurance companies. So can we get an immediate reply? Chairman, I'm trying to make an inquiry. If I'm not able to give you a reply before the end of this meeting, we'll give you a reply next time. I am not insisting on 5, 7, or other years. So you will have to compare yourself with other pieces of legislation, because your reference point is for the self-regulated organizations. But then my reference point would be for industries that are subject to regulation. For example, licensees under the SFC or licensees under the MPF. So you will have to make a horizontal comparison. That's my reference point. All right, Deputy Secretary, can you give us a paper next time on this? All right, please move on. Next is page 190, 64Q, is the duty to notify the authority of appointment. In other words, for 64Q, is about the licensed insurance agency. If it's to appoint anyone to be the authorized insurer, then at least 1 month before an authorized insurer appoints a licensed individual insurance agent to carry out regulated business, he will have to notify the authority in writing. And also, if it were to appoint a licensed individual, then he will also have to give the notice in writing. And also, for the company, if it were to appoint any representative, then 1 month before such appointment, the notice would also have to go to the authority. And according to the industry, 1 month might be too long. And therefore, we are now discussing with the industry to shorten the period. But then the premise is that it must not affect the authority's regulatory work. And in due course, we will be reporting to the Bills Committee on the discussion outcome. And if the outcome is different from the bill, then we will have to move a CSA. And then subsection 7 under on page 191, it says that if a person contravenes the relevant provisions, then he can be fined at level 5. Here I have a question. Okay, it may not necessarily have to be a month, right? And it would be a reasonable period of time. But then, during that period of time, if some changes take place, for example, if I'd like to get a licensed insurance agency or a representative from that agent, whether I'd like to appoint him or if he has approached me on his own volition, but then if nothing comes about from that discussion, in other words, the appointment has been cancelled, then what happens? Because for any cancellation of such appointment, you will also have to give advance notice, is that right? Well, for the termination of appointment, then under 64R, that has been set out, that is within 14 days of the termination of appointment, a notice will have to be given to the authority in writing. So the example that you just cited, Mr. Chairman, so it depends on whether or not the appointment has been made. If an appointment has been made and if the appointment has to be terminated, then within 14 days of that termination, the authority will have to be notified.
Please continue. Yes, Ms. Ho. I can understand why the industry thinks that 1 month is too long. May I ask the administration, 1 month, are you talking about working days or do you also take into account holidays? Because if we are talking about working days, then it will be unduly long. So please explain what is meant by 1 month, calendar month or 30 working days. One month means calendar month because it doesn't talk about 30 working days. My understanding is that holidays will also be included. But then, of course, when we have a long holiday, say for example in the coming Easter, we have got 5 or 6 days holiday in total. It doesn't matter, because in that case, if you insist on 30 working days, that's too long. It's even longer. If you talk about working days, then it will be 1.5 months. If 1 calendar month, then 30 days is 40 days. We talk about at least 1 month before. If they're able to get things ready and notify early, that can be allowed. Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chen. I think if they have signed the papers and then they submit the forms and then you give approval, does it mean that approval will be given in no more than 1 month's time? No, it is a matter of notification. They have to notify the authority. Why do you have such a requirement? Say, for example, today is the 1st of March. I would like to appoint this person, and then you give approval for 1st of April. No, according to our regulatory experience, we aren't acting as a rubber stamp. We don't just give approval irrespective of the case. We need time. We might have to consult other regulatory bodies, and in some cases, we may even have to consult the police. So it is necessary to have some time. That's why we say that notification by giving at least 1 month's notice. Ms. Ho wondered whether we should give more time. Yes, they can take more time, but at least 1 month. But not as what Mr. Chen had said. That is, we only need 1 month to process it, because sometimes we need to liaise with other regulatory bodies. In other words, after they've notified you, you have to sort of process it. Ms. Ho, well, for this one, you want to regulate that they have to notify you at least a month beforehand. On the other hand, do you have a time limit provision to say that within a certain period of time you have to tell the applicant whether it is successful or not? Yes, do we have a provision covering that? Mr. Chairman, no. Our duty, the applicant has the duty to submit the notification before a particular deadline. It's one way only. But then what if you sit on the file for 1 month and more? I think you need to come back to them and tell them one way or the other. Mr. Chairman, as the Commissioner has said, after we have received an application, we have to check whether this person is a fit and proper person. That takes time. Of course, within a reasonable time limit, we have to decide on the authorization or the appointment. If we don't, then it is unfair. In other words, they can complain to the ombudsman. Yes. Is it a matter of notice of no objection? Or do you need a formal approval to inform the notifier? We need a proper vetting process, because we have the fit and proper person rule. In subsection 6, we talk about updating the register. Yes, I can understand why notification at least a month beforehand. I don't think anyone here would object. That is, giving a month's notice. However, it seems the focus is that, well, they've notified you, but then what about the vetting process? Is it a matter of no objection, or would you formally notify them as to whether it is approved or not? Please consider it. Mr. Chen, well, it isn't anything new. Currently, when you want to notify, you need to give notification. Yes, it takes time to finish the processing, but there won't be more work than currently. I hope you won't sit on it for over a month. The longer you drag, the longer the waiting time. It may not be fair because it's a matter of whether someone can get a job or not. Mr. Chen, you are the sector representative. Do you know how long it takes currently? I don't know. I have to check. I am just making the point that I hope the time to be taken will be more or less the same. Administration, can you explain how the regulatory work is carried out? Mr. Chairman, within the Bureau, we have got a working group on the transition with membership from the 3 self-regulatory bodies. At our last meeting, we were talking about this process. We made reference to the current practice. As Mr. Chen has mentioned, we share the same goals. Just now, Ms. Hong has said that we may have to move ACSA. We just want to tally with the current practice. So on this point, maybe you want to give us something in writing. So at a later stage of scrutiny, please come back to us on this point. Ms. Ho, Mr. Chairman, I think usually we also impose a response time limit on the administration in matters like licensing and notification. Now, what will happen if you don't give an answer for a long time so that the matter cannot be settled? Now, you impose a time limit on the duty to notify, but I think you have to make sure that it is not a one-way requirement, and you have to you have to make a decision one way or other. For the current arrangements, do you have a response time limit? Not provided for in the law, but I'm sure this point can be considered. Now, you impose a duty to notify. It's impossible if you don't have a deadline to give an answer. Mr. Sin, I don't object to improving it, but then please look at the practice of other licensing authorities or regulatory bodies. Mr. Sin, I don't think we must follow the practice of other regulators. Now you impose a duty on others. I think it's only reasonable, sensible for us to expect a response time. Well, it is different. Say, for example, if you submit an application to a government department, if there's no news about it, would you find it acceptable? If they simply say it is being processed, would that be fine? But I'm sure there must be a response time limit. They can't drag on forever. Please don't have double standard. No, I don't. It's a different matter if you go to another insurance company and a new application. For a new application, information has to be collected. It doesn't matter if the government says 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months, as long as a time limit is named, it's fine. But if you insist that it has to be done within 2 weeks' time, then it is different. If you want to make sure that they will keep the applicant informed. Now, the duty to notify is to do so a month beforehand. So I think response time should also be 1 month. Now, they apply by giving 1 month's notice, so it is only reasonable to expect a reply in a month's time. Because we suppose that 1 month would be adequate to have 1 round of consultation. Mr. Chairman, if I may share my experience with you, as to 1 month is adequate for the regulator. It all depends on the applicant. In our previous experience, an applicant may be new to Hong Kong, so we may have to liaise with overseas regulatory bodies to find out about the track record of doing similar business elsewhere. Sometimes our counterpart regulators may not be able to respond to us immediately. So, in principle, we don't find that it will pose a great difficulty as to whether it should be accommodated in the law or in our code of practice or in our performance pledge. Say, for example, we must give an initial reply for the first time within a particular period of time, and if we need more time, then we should also notify. I'm sure we can come back in writing to tell you what reference we have made and what factors have been taken into account. Commissioner, I agree with you. Maybe it can't be provided for in the law and you can have it incorporated into your code of practice, but then it is only reasonable that you ask for notification at least a month beforehand. So we have to find out your reason. This is because you have expected to need 1 month's time to finish your work. Say, for example, I plan to take up the new job or join the profession on the 1st of April. And therefore, before the 28th of February, I have to give notification so as to give you 1 month's time. But then come the 1st of April, I haven't got news from you. Should I report duty or not? And what about my prospective employer? Should the recruitment be continued or not? For the employer, it's not a very serious matter. But for me, who is an employee, I'm waiting for the job and I have to make a living. So the government is expected to give a reply. In principle, we don't find any problem as to how it should operate. Give us time to go back to consider it. I think legislators are also concerned about the actual operation. In the past, laws have been passed, but then their sort of operability is doubtful. Ms. Ho, I'm more familiar with the case of the EIA reports. Well, after EIA report has been submitted, then the administration must give a reply within a certain period of time. And if conditions are required, then conditions will be imposed. Of course, EIA reports are more complicated, more technical. Here, we're talking about duty to notify. I think it is much easier. I don't think you always need more than a month's time. Mr. Chen has talked about usually requiring 1 week's time only.
I think it should be bilateral. In other words, if you give other people 1 month, so you expect that you will take 1 month to process the application. And if it's a reasonable period, well, let's not say that the industry is concerned that 1 month is too long. So if you think that 1 month is reasonable, then at least you should promise that within this same period of time, you should be able to give a response to the applicant. So it's not an outright rejection. But then that's the end of a particular stage, and therefore you should at least inform the other party that it's okay or not. All right. You will have to note that members do have this concern. That is, they hope that the requirement can be two-way. Yes, to answer the question relating to the register, that is about the intermediary's record of disciplinary action taken against him. And just now, the members asked about the SFC arrangement. In fact, they would also require the record to be kept for 5 years. And then for the MPFA, it would also require the record to be kept for 5 years. That's about the disciplinary action taken against the licensee. All right, so Mr. Sin, are you happy? The answer is 5 years, because for other regulatory systems whereby there are licensees, that the record would also be required to be kept for 5 years. All right, 63R, just now it says that 63 or 64, 64R is about the termination of appointment. So within 14 days after the date on which the appointment has been terminated, a notice will have to be given to the authority in writing of the termination. 192 is about the fine is set at level 5. If there are no questions, then 64S provides that the licensed insurance intermediary may apply to the authority for the approval for the variation of line of business. And then 64S2, subsection 2, it says that the authority in approving the variation in the line of business has to be satisfied that the intermediary is the appropriate person or the fit and proper person to be engaged in that regulated activity. In other words, before the approval is given, the intermediary is not allowed to change its line of business unless after the approval has been given by the authority. Chairman? Yes, Ms. Ho. Thank you. So, is there a time limit for this? So 64S, there is no time limit mentioned. So is it that under other provisions, if you make any application, then there is a time limit as to how long you're going to process the application? So when will the approval be given? Is that also a two-way situation? So apparently there is a problem here, because all along when you put in an application and when a reply will be given, apparently you have not specifically provided for that. And if it's absent here, then you will have to make sure that it's provided for in a code. So we will put it on record. We will note it so that we will be going after you in the future. Chairman, when I look at 64S alone, so for the restriction imposed on the application, there is no time limit imposed either. Yes, of course. All right, the intermediary might have been engaging in such business, and you allow him the time to put in the application for the variation of the line of business. So it can be for the intermediary or an individual applying for the change. So is it that there is no need for you to put down the time limit for the application? Chairman, when compared to the earlier provision, I think this one is somewhat different, because the earlier one is about the licensed intermediary and is about the particulars of their employees, because we have to update the register of the intermediary as soon as possible so that the public can inspect the latest records. So there is a time limit here. But then for the change of the line of business, obviously you will have to put in an application, and then it will have to be vetted by the authority. And therefore, and also for the application for the change of business, it would also involve the processing time, and the matters under consideration would be somewhat more. That's why there is no time limit imposed on this. All right, I agree, Chairman. Because if you are going to engage in a new line of business, you cannot just impose a time limit on the authority. So it's like taking a driving test. So long as you can pass, then you'll be given a license. So there is no time limit imposed on this. And therefore, I understand what or why there is no time limit here. All right, moving on. 6040 is about the duty of the licensed insurance broker company. If it ceases to carry on regulated activities, then at least 3 months beforehand, a written notice will have to be given to the authority. And subsection 2 says that the licensed insurance broker company will also have to have an auditor's report on the financial statements, which will be included in the notice of cessation of business. And also subsection B 1 to 4 would also have to be included in the auditor's statement or report. It would cover the capital and net assets of the licensed insurance broker company, and also the professional indemnity insurance taken up by the company, and also whether or not they have kept separate client accounts, and also whether the insurance broker company has kept proper books and accounts, and also any other documents that are prescribed by rules made under section 127. And the licensed insurance broker company must submit the above mentioned documents to the authority within 6 months after the date of cessation. And if there is a violation, then the fine will be set at level 5. No question. Then next, subdivision 2 is about grant of license on the first instance. Well, under 64U to 64EZD, it says that eligible persons can apply in the designated form to the authority, and they would also have to pay the prescribed fee. And then 64U is about insurance agency applying for license and the procedural requirements for such applications. 64U1 provides that for sole proprietor, partnership, or company may apply to the authority for an insurance agency license to carry on regulated business or activities. Subsection 3 requires that in applying for an insurance agency license, the applicant would have to submit a technical representative as the applicant for the license, and later on will be giving you the definition for technical representative. If there are no questions, please move on. Next, subsection 5 says that in approving or granting the license, the authority must be satisfied that the applicant and also the technical representative would be a fit and proper person to carry on the regulated activities. If there are no questions, then page 196, subsection B, in issuing the license, the authority has to be satisfied that the applicant is appointed as an agent by at least one authorized issuer. And then subsection C provides that in fact every applicant can only apply for and hold one license. If there are no questions, then 197, subsection 8 and 9 provide that the authority must give the applicant a notice in writing, and if the authority rejects the application, then in a notice the reasons for the rejection must be set up. And then 64V talks about the validity of the license, so it will be valid for 3 years. Yes, Mr. Chen Kin-po, thank you. I'd like to understand a bit more, because for the IIA, probably it will be set up in 2017, and therefore during the next few years, we are still having the 3 intermediary organizations doing the regulation. So are the provisions similar to the existing ones, or in the future would it be more difficult for an insurance agency to become a licensee? Well, you talk about comparable requirements. So are you talking about the licensing requirements, for example, 64U, and also the subsections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? So apparently the existing requirement would not be that complicated. Or are you making things more difficult in the future? Well, the thing is, Chairman, for example, 64U talks about what is the class of people who can apply. for a license. For example, does it have to be a company or does it have to be an individual who can apply to become a licensed insurance agency? That's why we talk about sole proprietor, partnership, or company. They can all apply. So we have looked at the actual situation, and at present, for the registered agencies, there are sole proprietors, there are partnerships, and there are also companies. That's why it's a reflection of the existing situation. And the purpose of this is to hope that there can be a smooth transition. And also, for the eligibility for application, well, the most important eligibility criterion would be the fit and proper person, and there are 3 requirements. First, the education level and also the professional qualification, and whether or not there have been any records of violations in the past, whether or not it involves other regulators, and whether there have been such records. And third is about the financial position. So we have no intention of making things somewhat different from the existing requirements. Well, I just noticed that for any violations under other regulatory regimes, for example, if I've been involved in financial securities and so on, now I try to change my line of business, and now I try to become an insurance agency. Does it mean that my previous record of violation under the securities regime would also be known to you? Alright, if it's a first-time application for license, then in considering whether or not the person is a fit and proper person to hold the license, then the IIA will have to consider certain factors, and that would also include any records kept by other regulators. So the requirement is very stringent then. So have you talked to the trade about this? Alright, if I have committed any offenses in other industries, when I try to change my line of business to become an insurance agency, I will have to give it a second thought, because all the records will then emerge and be made known to the authority. If you look at other pieces of legislation, well, in the financial services sector, well, in considering whether or not a person is a fit and proper person, such factors will always be taken on board. All right, Mr. Chen has also raised his hand. Is there any definition about the controller? Yes, earlier on page 176, when we started this division, we already talked about this, and we were also asked about the 15% threshold, and we'll be giving a written reply next time on this. All right, any further questions? Next, 64W on 197 is about the licensing of individual insurance agent. So anybody can apply to the authority for an individual insurance agent license. And then 198, it also provides that the authority, in scrutinizing the application, must be satisfied that the relevant person is a fit and proper person to carry on the regulated activities, and the applicant is appointed as an agent by at least one authorized insurer, and the applicant is neither the holder of a license granted under other provisions. And then 64X provides for the validity of the license is for 3 years, and then 64Y is about the grant of license or technical representative or agent. Any individual can apply to the authority for a technical representative license. And then 199 subsection 3 provides that the authority in issuing a license must be satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person, and also the applicant is appointed as an agent by a licensed insurance agency or a person who is applying to become an insurance agency. And then 64C talks about the validity of the agent license is for 3 years.
Page 200, Section 64ZA, Grant of License Insurance Broker Company. A company may apply to the authority for an insurance broker company license. Subsection 2, similar to the insurance agent license. A person has to be a technical representative, and he has to be the responsible officer. Page 201, in subsection 4, it says that when the authority handles the application, certain things have to be taken into account. That is, the applicant is a fit and proper person to carry on regulated activities. Each director and the controller are also fit and proper persons. Subsection D, the applicant is able to demonstrate that he will be able to comply with the rules made under Section 127 that set out the requirements in relation to the capital and net assets, in relation to the professional indemnity insurance, in relation to the keeping of separate client accounts, and in relation to the keeping of proper books and accounts. Any questions? No questions? Then, page 202. Section 64ZB, the validity of the license is for 3 years. Page 203, Section 64ZC, grant of license technical representative broker. Subsection 1, any individual may apply to the authority. Subsection 3, the authority has to take the following factors into account. A, whether the person is a fit and proper person, and whether the applicant is appointed as an agent by at least one licensed insurance broker company. Page 204, Section 64ZD, validity for 3 years. Section 64ZE, approval of responsible officers. Under the current self-regulatory regime, the intermediaries of business entities also have to appoint a person to be responsible for the ethics of the intermediary. And then we want to have something similar to make sure that there will be internal control. We say that the licensee of the entity must at least appoint a responsible officer. 64ZE and 64ZF says that the business entity can appoint one or more than one responsible officer and must get the approval of the authority. The authority will take into account whether this person is a fit and proper person for discharging this duty when processing the application. And then under 4C, the authority must consider whether the individual has sufficient authority from the principal applicant and will be provided with sufficient resources and support for discharging those responsibilities. Page 205. Just now for 64ZE, that's about the agencies. Now 64ZF, that's about the broker companies and the approval of their responsible officers. Basically, the provisions mirror those under 64ZE. Please continue. If there aren't questions, then that takes us to page 204, 64ZG. It says that the authority, when giving out a license or when giving approval, may impose conditions regarded as appropriate by the authority. Page 207, subsection 5. When imposing the conditions, the authority must in writing notify the relevant persons. Mr. Sin, a general question. The license will be valid for 3 years. I wonder whether you may, in some cases, think that it's better if a 1 year, a 2 year license can be given instead of a full-term license of 3 years. You do talk about having a license up to 3 years, but a license valid for 3 years. For 64ZD, it says it's valid for 3 years, or if the authority considers it appropriate in a particular case, another period determined by the authority. So generally speaking, 3 years, or as Mr. Sin has suggested, it can be shorter than 3 years, but also longer than 3 years. I can understand a period that is shorter than 3 years, but I'm doubtful about longer than 3 years. What about if you give approval for 20 years? Of course, I don't think you would do so because it is not reasonable. But this is permissible under the law. If we take a look at 64ZD, the policy intention is such that, generally speaking, a license is good for 3 years, and then the license can be renewed. Later on, we have the provisions covering renewal. Now, Mr. Sin referred to special cases, and he hoped that the authority could have discretion about the validity period of the licenses. I won't go into the details with you. Now, in some cases, it may not be right to give a 3-year license. However, here it seems that the discretion is too great. For other regulatory bodies, I think the discretion isn't as wide as this one here. Mr. Chairman, I think I can go back to confirm this point. I think this is aligned, this is the same as that under the SFO. Yes, please check it out for us. Please continue. Page 208. Subdivision 3. Non-disciplinary grounds for revocation and suspension. For the new 64ZH and 64ZI, licensed insurance agency or licensed individual insurance agents, if they cease to be appointed as an agent by at least one authorized insurer, then the license is suspended on and from the date on which the cessation takes effect, and where the cessation continues for 180 days, then the license will be revoked. Mr. Chairman, please explain. Usually, an agency can appoint more than one. Are you saying that there can't even be one appointment? How can they start the business? Of course, there must be somebody who's operating. If there can't even be one appointment, then it will be suspended for 180 days, and after that, revocation. Any questions? No? Then let's continue. We can take 64ZJ and 64ZK together. If a licensed technical representative agent ceases to be appointed by an agent by a licensed insurance agency, then it will be a case of suspension of the license. And then the arrangements will be similar to those we talked about. All right, please continue. Page 210. 64ZL, 64ZM and ZL should be taken together. The approval of a person as a responsible officer of an agency is revoked if that person ceases to be a technical representative agent. If the person ceases to be responsible for the conduct, and if the person ceases to have sufficient authority or to be provided with sufficient resources, the authority may also revoke the approval. Please continue. If there are no questions, then page 212, and it's about 64ZN and 64ZO on page 213. It says that licensed insurance agencies or broker companies, if they no longer have a responsible officer, then the license may be suspended by the authority. Now, if they don't apply for approval of their responsible officer, or if the approval is rejected within 90 days, then the license can be revoked. Didn't you talk about 180 days? 180 days is for the appointment of licensed insurance agency. Here it is about the absence of a responsible officer. I think it isn't quite clear here. Sorry, speakers off mic. Speakers off mic. Please switch on the mic. Please switch on the mic. It's not for me to turn it on. They switch on my mic. Yes, please switch on the mic of Mr. Wong. Is it working? All right. For section 64ZN, please elaborate. I don't see the point you made from subsection 1. For subsection 2, the authority may revoke the license of the licensed insurance agency if A. The licensed insurance agency has not made an application under section 64ZE for the approval of an individual as a responsible officer of the licensed insurance agency within 90 days. Please repeat this point. I don't think we got it clear enough. Yes, Mr. Chairman, the intermediaries must appoint a responsible officer. It means that, first of all, he must be a licensed person. He is qualified to carry out intermediary activities. And the law says that the company must provide him with sufficient resources and support so as to allow him to discharge the duty. What's the duty of this responsible officer? Mainly speaking, has to make sure that the intermediary can follow certain requirements of the law. So first of all, each intermediary must have a responsible officer. For the first leg in 64ZN, if they haven't got a responsible officer, the license has to be suspended. But then it is not quite clear. It talks about for a period named by the authority and the reason or the activity. Sometimes a person may resign, and then the agency is not having a responsible officer. So we have to provide for the provisions so that they can get a fit and proper person to be a responsible officer, so that they will comply with all the requirements. And then in 90 days' time, the intermediary must find a replacement. as a responsible officer. Or until the occurrence of an event specified by the authority. So that's the deadline. What is meant by the event specified by the authority?
64 said N1 is just a suspension of the license, as we said. For example, if all of a sudden someone resigns, then the license will be suspended until such time. All right, until the occurrence of an event specified by the authority takes place. So there is a gap, but then there is a time limit as to how long that gap will last. So what does that mean by the occurrence of an event specified by the authority? So you have not been able to explain it or justify it. Well, by that we mean that the intermediary can identify a fit and proper person to become the controller. But then why have you not specified that? Because you say that for a period or until the occurrence of an event specified by the authority. So if what you mean is that until such time when they have identified a person to become the responsible officer, then why have you not spelled that out clearly? Well, maybe there is a breach. That's why they have to suspend the license. But then it's not very clearly stated. So what do you mean by the occurrence of an event specified by the authority? Well, it's not about the Chinese standard, Chairman. It's about the way they've expressed it. So what do you mean by a period or until the occurrence of an event specified by the authority? All right, if there is a time limit, it's very clear. So within that period of time, if you're not able to appoint another person as a replacement, then your license will be revoked. That's all. Well, let me explain it, Chairman. In fact, we are trying to cover a few scenarios. Number one, if there is a responsible officer who has resigned, then there is a situation whereby the authority might require that within 1 month you will have to appoint a replacement. So that's the specified period of time. Or I might require that within a month's time you must put in place a set of procedure which would enable you to comply with the requirements. So that would be the occurrence of an event specified by the authority, but that it doesn't necessarily mean that you are able to identify a fit and proper person to become the responsible officer. As I just said, there might be difficulties in identifying such a person, but then if there are internal procedures that can guarantee that the licensee will still be able to satisfy the authority's requirement. Well, you have just come up with this, so you're just trying to answer my question for the sake of answering. Well, Chairman, I can give you a concrete example. I think he doesn't understand it himself. That's why he was not able to express himself very clearly. All right, please allow the Commissioner to answer the question. All right, a concrete example would be that, well, as Mr. Wong just said, let's say if he is able to identify a replacement, or if the original responsible officer has taken out sick leave, and then during that period of time, for the occurrence of a specified event, that is, he has cancelled his sick leave, he is now well again, and therefore he is able to resume duty. So that might be the situation that we are referring to. So how can the law be non-specific, so that you can expand the scope, and then there are innumerable possibilities? That's why the authority will be looking at the situation. Either it will specify a period of time. All right, by the time when the case is presented before the court, unless you have a case law, but then you're just making conjectures. It's not even a specific case, but then the authority should have the right or power to specify how things are dealt with. For example, if that responsible officer has resumed duty after a period of sick leave, then the license might not have to be revoked or suspended. But then you're talking about regulated agencies or persons, then they would have to have a very good understanding of the law. If they do not understand it, then it would be very difficult for them to comply with the law. But then the way you have answered the question, in fact, is like you're trying to come up with ad hoc answers. It's not like you have thought about it very thoroughly. So either you say that so long as there is no responsible officer, then I'll suspend your license. You have a specified period of time. You also talk about the occurrence of a specified event, and that's the condition on which you would be granting the license. And nobody understands this. So what does that mean? Chairman, allow me to say a few words. It's not like what Mr. Wong just described. First of all, we have to know that given the licensing conditions for the intermediaries, so there has to be a responsible officer. That's an absolute requirement. That's why, in terms of our legal provisions, we have to come up with provisions to cater for a situation whereby something unforeseen happens. For example, if the responsible officer is not there, for example, he might have resigned, or for whatever reason, there is no such responsible officer in place. So if that should happen, then the authority has to have this discretionary power to specify that if something specified happens, then he will still be satisfied that apparently there will still be a responsible officer. Because the most important thing is to have a responsible officer in place. Yes, of course, you have to have someone responsible. But then if something should happen to that responsible officer, all right, he might have resigned, or he might be sick, or he might have taken flight MH370. So as to what might happen, there is no way that the authority can foretell. That's why by the time when this happens, it would be looking at the situation, and then it will specify that until certain things happen, a certain action will be taken. The way I put it is very simple. All right, you said that if that should happen, then the authority would have this discretionary power if something happens. But then but then the authority will be specifying the event that will be happening. So what does that mean? What does it mean when you say that there is a specified incident? So it's your judgment as to what would constitute the specified occurrence. So sick leave might be one. What if someone has gone berserk? But then you did not say that that would be a specified event. You would be very passive. So what do you mean by a specified event? So that would be for the authority to specify. Mr. Sin, and then Mr. Chan Kin Po. I'll give my turn to Mr. Chan Kin Po. Well, in fact, if something happens, then the authority would say that within a particular period of time, within a specified period of time, something should happen. So you should have said that you will have to comply with the requirement of the authority. So if you can meet the requirement, then your license will not be revoked or suspended. So it's drafted in a very cumbersome way here. So all you're requiring is that within a specified time, you will have to meet the requirements, or else your license will be revoked. I think you could have drafted it in a more simple way. So after the expiry of the specified time, if you are still not able to meet the requirement, then your license will be revoked. It's as simple as that. So it's not for me to draft for them. So I'm just pointing out the problems, and it's not for me to move amendments. What about other pieces of legislation? Do they also use similar wording? Chairman, we can go back and check, but then the policy objective is very clear. That is, we have to cater for certain scenarios. Yes, that has been pointed out. Sorry, speaker is not coming through. All right, for licensed insurance agency, if there is no longer a responsible officer, that's a very important requirement. It's a prerequisite, and therefore you will have to give them some room for maneuvering. So the authority can specify a period of time for them to meet the requirements. So within that period of time, if you're not able to hand in a responsible officer, then I'll be revoking your license. So within a specified period of time. So if the specified event has not taken place, then your license will be revoked. But then nobody is able to understand what you mean here. So even if you emphasize that, I would still find it difficult to understand. So if you're not able to meet the requirement within the specified time, if there is no responsible officer in place, then your license will be revoked. I think you've misunderstood it. That is after the expiry of that time period, I'll be revoking your license. Well, if you do not have a responsible officer, I will suspend your license. So I can suspend your license. So I may suspend your license. As to how long I'll be suspending your license, I might specify that, all right, your license will be suspended for a month, or your license would be suspended until the time when your responsible officer can resume duty after his sick leave. All right, you might say that within 90 days you can make an application, and then the authority can reject the application. But then it says that during the 90 days after the period under 64E, it has not submitted an application. In other words, in the end, if you're not able to hand in, or if you're not able to come up with a responsible officer, then your license will be revoked. Chairman, that's right. But then it doesn't mean that under 64 set N, there is no need for us to have that subsection, because subsection 2 says that the license will be revoked. But then N1, subsection 1 is to give them the time to identify someone to become the responsible officer. That's why the license will be suspended. Yes, I know under 64 set N subsection 1 what it says here. But then you have not expressed that very clearly. I believe that the sentence structure is problematic, because you have not been able to explain to us as to what's meant by the occurrence of the event specified by the authority. All right, you have the specified period of time, but then it's an or phrase. So I can specify that the license will be suspended for a month, or until the occurrence of an event specified by the authority. For example, if that responsible officer has resumed duty after his sick leave, or you are able to identify another responsible officer, all right, that would be even more problematic, because you have a specified period of time. But then you are saying that it can be until the occurrence of an event. It can be very long. For how long a person can go missing, or for how long can a person be sick? It depends on the circumstances of the case. We have to look at the merits of the case in determining whether the suspension of license would be applicable to a period of time, or until such time when the specified event takes place. So in reality, there might be many different circumstances. But then, in terms of the wording, you can tidy it up so that it would be more easy to understand. For example, even if someone is sick, there can be different circumstances. In some cases, even if an individual is sick, he will still be able to discharge his duty. But then in some cases, that person might no longer be able to work. So by the time when the IIA is set up, the IIA will have to look at how this will be dealt with, instead of just saying that, all right, as soon as the responsible officer fell sick, then the license will be suspended. There can be a replacement or an acting officer. Or it would also depend on the condition of the person who is sick. Will he be able to go back to work, or will he be able to discharge his duty at home? Or in some cases, the individual might be able to discharge his duty while he's hospitalized. But then, the way you have put it here is hard to understand. Yes, Mr. Tan Kin Paul? I'd like to clarify this here, because you say that the license may be suspended, but then sometimes the person might just pass away all of a sudden. So does that mean that the license will be revoked right away? All right, if the operation remains unchanged, then there is a possibility that you don't necessarily have to revoke the license or suspend the license. Is that right? Correct. All right, if someone passes away, then what is going to happen to the agency? Next, Mr. Sin. Well, under set I on page 180, All right, if an agent does not have a responsible officer, then his license will be revoked. But then here, you refer to 2 circumstances under which there is no responsible officer. Is that right? Correct. Okay. So please think about it.
係主席啊，我想
Mr. Chairman, for 64ZN, the IIA must be given the discretion to deal with the matter. As to the wording, that is until the occurrence of an event specified, I think we can reconsider it. Yes, if you can improve it, please come back with a CSA for the Chinese version. But if you can't find a better alternative and you think that this is already the best drafting, so be it. All right. Call it a day. All right. We'll pause here. And then next meeting to be held on the 24th of March at 10:45, and then 4:30 p.m. on the 14th of April. Nothing under AOB meeting agenda. Thank you.